I'll have my cup of tea.
Nice to see you all. And okay, let's share the screen and go to the Bible study.
Okay.
Are we screen sharing?
Yeah, I've got it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on study 4 of Underneath His Wings, studies in the book of Ruth. And the story so far, resolution, Ruth chapter 4. The story so far, if you remember, Ruth and Naomi have come back from Moab as widows, and you get this continuous refrain about Naomi feeling empty, that she's lost everything, but there's a gradual sort of refilling as Ruth is a very faithful daughter-in-law to her. And Ruth meets Boaz, who turns out to be what they call a kinsman redeemer, a goel, if you remember. And Naomi realizes that Boaz would be a good person to ask for help, that Boaz might be able to marry Ruth and help resolve their situation, their lost situation. So Ruth goes to Boaz and asks him for marriage. And he says that he would love to marry her, but there's a closer relative. But he will make sure it's sorted out. He will make sure that she's given marriage before the end of the day. So we get to Ruth chapter 4. So I'll read it. This is the NIV version. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so that I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the kinsman redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, and so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all these at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you through this young woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. Maybe he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. And the women living there said, "Naomi has a son." and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Abinadab. Abinadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. The end. So this is the story so far, and the conclusion of the story. And we're introduced right at the last minute to this last character, and he's the man with no name. We don't know what he's called, and you're going to remember that because we remember how important names are in this story. The story writer is hammering it home all the time. Names are important. It's important that your name is remembered. But this is the man with no name. We don't know who he is, except that he's a closer relative to Elimelech and has the right of to act as kinsman redeemer, as Goel. So they gather in the city gate. This is not an Israeli city gate, it's a gate from a medieval building. But what you can see is that it's not just simply a single gate. A gate is the sort of vulnerable point in a walled city or a castle. So it has a sort of a gatehouse around it, which in times of war, if the enemy manages to get through the first gate, they become trapped in between that gate and the second gate. It's a bit like an airlock, but of course in times of peace, and these were actually larger than you get on medieval castles in the towns in Israel. I didn't have time to put it up, but I've got a photograph of the ruins of one of these city gates in Israel, and it's quite a large area. And so of course in peacetime it was used almost like a town hall. It was a convenient gathering place for the people, but particularly for the men of the city. The elders of the city would sort of act like magistrates, and people would conduct legal business, and that's exactly what we see here. So it's almost like a court scene. This last little bit of the story in the city gate, and it was obviously a coveted thing to be someone who was respected in the city gate. You might remember in Proverbs 31, the woman of noble character, her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. So a woman of noble character is someone who will enhance the reputation of her husband, so that he can be an elder in the city, in the village, that he can be respected. And you might remember, I think Chris taught you about Job, how Job, one of the things that he grieved over was that he used to be a respected elder in the land, and now he's outcast. Now he's not. People just laugh at him. He's not included anymore. So Boaz meets with the man with no name in the city gate, and he calls some witnesses so that we know that this is going to be official legal business. And he points out that to the other relative that he has the right of redemption. He has the right to redeem land. That's one of the things that a goel, a kinsman redeemer, the duties that he had to do. If land was sold outside of the family, then he would have the right to buy back the land so that it doesn't go out of the family. Now, this is the first time we've heard about this piece of land. Obviously, it must have belonged to Elimelech. It's his family inheritance. And one of two things may have happened. It may be that Elimelech sold up in order to build up a sum of cash in order for the family to emigrate to Moab. That's quite likely. But Ruth, of course, retains Elimelech's right of redemption. And so that's a possibility that it's a bit like buying, you know, when you have the, yeah, or the course, you know, when you have the mortgaged cards and a Monopoly game, and you buy them up, and then you redeem them and turn them back into usable bits of land. So it's that sort of thing. It's an idea of buying back the land, and this unknown relative has the right to do that. And so, of course, Boaz is quite canny. He introduces this positive thing first, this legal thing first, that obviously, you know, the opportunity for in a farming community to buy more land is always attractive. So he likes this idea. Or it may be that Naomi's got this piece of land, she can't farm it, she's an old lady, and she needs to realize some cash, so she will have to sell it outside the family unless he wants to buy it first. So it's either of those two options, but this Goel has the right to redeem the land, and he's quite keen to do that. But then Boaz points out that there are strings attached. If he's admitting that he's a Goel, that he's kinsman redeemer for the land, he has to also admit that he's a Goel, he's a kinsman redeemer for the women. And Ruth, you remember, has made a formal request for levirate marriage. That's the responsibility for the family of a widow to marry her to another member of the family, so that her first husband's name is remembered. It's all about this remembering the names, keeping the memory alive. That's so very important in the story of Ruth. Remember the names, keep my name alive. Don't let Elimelech's line die here, because he and both his sons are dead without children. And so the idea would be that the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, will marry Ruth, and their first child, their first son, will go down in the records as the son of Mahlon, not the son of the husband. And the husband will have all the duties of raising the child and acting as a father to him, and all the expense and trouble of it, but he won't get the credit for it. But the child will inherit his father's land and will keep that side of the family going. But if by any chance that's the only child that is born, then that child will inherit the Goel father's land, as well as his legal father's land, the adoptive father's land, you know, as well. But his name won't be remembered. He will disappear from history, as it were, disappear from the records. And nobody wants that. With this culture, this importance of having your name remembered, being your name kept alive. And so he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to enter into this levirate marriage. There are significant risks and costs and expenses involved, and it seems to him that the benefit isn't there. So what would happen would be, we would have a family tree that went Elimelech, the father of Mahlon, the father of the son of Mahlon, who was in fact the son of the Goel, but he doesn't get any credit. So he won't do this. But the irony is, if you think about it, 3,000 years later, we're still talking about Elimelech and Boaz and Mahlon, and even Mahlon and Chilion, who only make a sort of passing appearance in the story. And yet we have no idea who this bloke is. It's almost like his name has deliberately been erased. The one who wouldn't take a risk, the one who wouldn't take up his responsibilities to take care of these childless widows, it ends up being the one who is forgotten, the one who is actually erased from the records, whereas Boaz and Elimelech are still remembered and still important in the history of two religions, possibly three. I'm not sure what stance Islam takes on Boaz and Ruth and so on, but certainly two religions. This is still a very significant story, but it's the story of Boaz and the story of Ruth and not the story of the man with no name who erases himself from the story. So the legal transfer is symbolized by the handing over of a sandal. And the writer, interestingly, makes it clear that this is an old, obsolete tradition even then, even when he's writing, sort of perhaps 100 or so years later in the time of David, because this is what they used to do. So he helpfully explains the tradition for us, that's how you hand over a piece of property, the right of redemption, to another family member by handing over your sandal. So he does that symbolically. And then the elders pray this wonderful prayer. Pray, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Epaphra and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So there's no longer any talk about Ruth being the Moabitess. You remember at the beginning of the story, that gets hammered home over and over again. She's the outsider, she's the Moabitess, she doesn't belong. Here she's being taken into the very heart of Israel, the very heart of the story of the Jewish nation. They're praying that she will be like Rachel and Leah, the sort of founding mothers of the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. They take their descent from Rachel and Leah, and so they're saying they're bringing Ruth very much right into the heart of this story, and of the people, the women and men who have built up the nation and the family of Israel. She's right in the middle of that. That's what they're praying for her. They're praying for Boaz, that his standing and his name will be built up. Again, it's that he'll be famous, that he'll be known, that his name will be recognized and remembered. That very thing that the Goel was afraid of, the alternative one, that his name would be forgotten, that's never going to happen to Boaz here. And then they cite another instance of levirate marriage that is actually already in Boaz's family tree. They mention the story of Tamar. Now, this is a bit of an odd one, a story when we read it to ourselves. It's a strange story. Tamar was also a foreigner, a Canaanite, and she married the son of Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, the head of sort of one of the tribes of Israel. One of the 12 tribes is Judah, and he's the father of this tribe. One of his sons, his oldest son, marries a Canaanite woman called Tamar, but unfortunately the son dies, and so they practice the levirate marriage custom, and she marries his second son, who also dies, and this goes on until he's only got one son left, and raises a child. And Judah decides he's not going to risk marrying his one remaining son to Tamar. So but she has the right to this levirate marriage. She has the right to receive this inheritance and so on. So he tells her, well, wait till he grows up. You go home to your dad for now, and wait till he grows up. But of course, as time goes on, and she's living as a widow in her father's house, which is probably not a terribly comfortable position to be in, bit of a sort of spare wheel, a bit awkward. She realizes that Judah has obviously no intention of marrying her to his son, that he's trying to pretend everybody's forgotten all about that. And so she takes matters into her own hands, and she puts on a veil, and she sits by the side of the road where the prostitutes sat, and she pretends that she's a prostitute. And sure enough, Judah comes along and decides that he will go with her, and so he goes with her, and she sort of negotiates the price for the transaction, but he hasn't got it on him, so she takes his seal and his staff as a pledge. So she's got some proof of what he's promised, and well, you know, what happens. Anyway, a little while later, Judah is told. Well, a little while later, the consequence of what happened is that Judah is told that that Tamar is pregnant, and he's absolutely furious. This is shameful. His unmarried daughter-in-law pregnant. She's brought shame on the family, and they bring her out and they're going to burn her to death for prostitution. And she says, well, yes, I was the prostitute, but these things belong to my client. And Judah is sort of hoist on his own petard, as it were. You know, obviously he's the father of the child that is coming, and he says, Tamar is more righteous than I am, because Tamar, although, you know, in some ways we would say she's acted in morally dubious ways, she's tricked a man about, you know, there's issues about consent, there's issues about deceit, there's issues about prostitution, but actually Tamar has acted in order to ensure that the law is followed, in order to ensure that she gets to inherit the land, that the family line is continued through her first husband, the eldest son, and she's acted in a righteous way in order to build up the tribe and the family, and so things are sort of turned on their head. It's an odd story, as I say, but it turns out that it's a relevant story because Perez is a direct her son, the child that is born as a result of this. Perez is a direct ancestor of Boaz. And so it's a, you know, everybody, because these genealogies are so important, everybody knows everybody else's genealogy and what they're, you know, and who they're descended from. So there's a sort of, you know, a reference in this prayer to, your family has a history of acting like this, of doing this. This is a good tradition. It's resulted in good things. It's resulted in your great-great-grandfather. So, you know, we're going to pray that that likewise, that this situation where Boaz, you have acted in such a righteous and fair and honourable way, will similarly be blessed, and that your offspring will do you credit. And so Boaz and Ruth are married, and a baby is born. Oh, isn't he lovely?
Yeah.
And the baby is put on Naomi's lap, because yes, Naomi has a grandchild, and every grandparent loves and adores their grandchildren, but actually what they're saying in putting this child sort of symbolically in her lap is that everything's going to be all right now. Your family line will continue because there's this child, and in fact the child becomes Naomi's kinsman redeemer. She's he because he is born, he's the one who's going to look after her in his old age. She no longer will go down as a childless widow. She'll go down as the matriarch of a family, because this baby has been born. She's no longer a spare mother-in-law in Boaz's house. She is the matriarch of a family, the mother of a family. They call her sort of legally the mother of this little baby boy, and they call the baby Obed, which incidentally means servant, or possibly servant of God. And Naomi, yeah, that's right. And Naomi, who remember felt that everything was empty, now has found everything is filled up again. She's no longer need to worry about where the next meal's coming from. And if, you know, as an old lady, she feels that her womb is empty, her lap is not empty, because her lap has got this baby in it. She's got it, and things have come full circle. She's full up again. Her basket is full and running over. And as the women of the town rejoice with her, they point out that she has a daughter-in-law who is better than 7 sons.
Amen.
And 7 is the number of perfection in the Bible. If you ever seen the number 7, it means perfection. And so what they're saying is, you know, even if you had 7, the perfect number of sons, you still could, they still wouldn't be outweighed by the loyalty and the faithfulness and the loving kindness and the energy and the service of this one woman, Ruth. And this is high praise. This is a story that comes from a very highly patriarchal culture. And yet the story makes clear that in the purposes of God, in this building up of this family, in the saving of this family, it's the faithful actions of both Ruth and Boaz, and Naomi herself as well, that bring it about. That it's both the men and the women in the family who are making this happen, and they truly are the family of Elimelech, which you remember means my God is king. In all the, you know, the land around the time of the judges, where everybody is acting as they see fit, this family are acting under God. They're living out the law, and they're living out as in the most honourable way that they can. That their king is God. And with that story finishes, as we've been going through all the way through, so how important it is to have a family tree in this culture, how important it is to know where you fit in the family tree, these genealogies. So the story ends quite fittingly with a genealogy, a short one. And it ends by both looking forward and backward. I suppose that's what a family tree does, isn't it? It enables you to look backward to see where you've come from, but also to look forward, because the writer is writing again from this distance into the future, to knowing what they didn't know then, the ultimate outcome of the story. So the story looks back to Perez, the son of Tamar, and Judah, and looks forward to David, Israel's greatest king. So the story ends with a king who was born in Bethlehem. And of course, if we take that telescope and draw the vision further back and see it broader and broader, we can see the future, and we see that David had an even greater descendant, Jesus, the King of Kings, the son of David. And Matthew picks up that idea when he begins his gospel with the genealogy of Jesus. And that genealogy unusually mentions 4 women, and 2 of them are Tamar and Ruth, because these women have made a marked difference in the story. Without them, things would have not gone the way they should have done. So they're very much part of this story, part of the story of the people of God that leads in the end to the King. The end.
Excellent.
No, it's not. It's the beginning.
The beginning.
Okay, I'm going to pause the recording and we're going to chat now. If you're watching it later, we're going to discuss the questions. So we'll see you soon.